We've been looking at the story around Avinu Malkeinu, and yesterday we sort of went deeper into the character and relationship of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Today, what I want to look at really is just the two words Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, and try to unpack a little bit about what the rabbinic associations with those terms are. I think for a lot of the imagery in prayer, we're sort of stuck with whatever images we have on the metaphors. And so if you like God as king, then this is working for you. And if you don't like, what it means to be a king, then this isn't working for you. So I wanted to sort of just broaden the possibilities of what these words and terms could mean with at least some of the rabbinic authorities thought of these metaphors. And so let's start with Avinu calling God our Father. Now, obviously, calling God our Father is something that another religion really, ran with. So in some ways, we don't associate this as a core central part of what it means to be in relationship with the Jewish God. But that's nevertheless something that the rabbis weren't shy about, and neither was the Torah. So let's start and take a look at how this image appears in the Torah, and then how the rabbis sort of understand it from there. I'm going to share the screen so we can do this together. Calling God our Father comes a number of times in the Bible. I want to bring you one of those examples because it's sort of the jumping off point for a midrash that we're going to see sort of unpacks the image. So Banim atem ladonai Elohechem is what it's stated in chapter 14 of Devarim. You are children to Adonai Elohechem. Now this verse happens not to have God as the father, it could be God as the parent, which might be sort of a helpful broader metaphor. But either way, the relationship is clear. God is the parent, we are the children. But what does that mean, for us to be the children of God? What are we implying when we make that claim, and how do we sort of play that out? So it's a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir that's analyzing this verse. Banim atem ladonai Elohechem. You are children to the Lord your God. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im noagim atem minhag banim, harei atem banim. V'im lav, hi atem banim. If you behave in the manner of a child, that is to say, not in like a derogatory way, but like if you're in relationship with God and you are acting like God's child, then indeed you are God's child, God's children. But if you're not behaving in that way, then you're not God's children. That is to say, for Rabbi Yehuda, this is dependent on your behavior. It's a metaphor that's only as good as your actions. Now, that's distinct from Rabbi Meir's approach. Rabbi Meir Omer, ben kach uben kach, banim atem ladonai Elohechem. Rabbi Meir says, no matter what, whether you're behaving properly like a child should, or whether you're not behaving properly, nevertheless, you are children. And sort of that is, I think, the power of the metaphor, right? The power of the metaphor of a parent and a child is no matter what the child does, they can't undo the relationship that they are the child of the parent. And that's sort of what Rabbi Meir is pressing on. And he brings a number of proof texts that indeed criticize Israel, but nevertheless call them children, i.e. they remain children. So, they are foolish children in Jeremiah, or they're children without faith. And then in Isaiah, we have seed of evildoers, perverse children. So there's all these critiques in the prophets of Bnei Israel who are nevertheless called children. And I think that's sort of the point that Rabbi Meir is making is no matter what you do, you are nevertheless holding on to the status and relationship of parent and child. That doesn't go away. So I think that at least, when we recite Avinu Malkeinu in the context of sin, in the context of asking for forgiveness, it's clear that we are not or have not behaved the way we should have behaved. And nevertheless, we're sort of daring to call God our parent. That is to say, we're not on the Rabbi Yehuda team of God's our parent as long as we're good, but rather on the Rabbi Meir team of God is our parent no matter what. And that's sort of part of the implied relational claim that we're making when we say Avinu Malkeinu over and over again. The Avinu is sort of emphasizing no matter what, we are still in this relationship. Let's take a look at the Malkeinu side, the Melech side. What does it mean for us to call God a king? Now, one of the challenges, again, especially for Americans who rebelled against the king, is our founding narrative. The idea of calling God a king can be a difficult metaphor to get behind. But I wanted to say that the rabbis also, I think, had a difficult time getting behind the idea of God as a king if what you associate with a king is a human king and the human king's attributes and behaviors. But what they end up doing is saying, whatever you associate with a human king, God is the opposite of a human king. And they run through a number of examples of this throughout rabbinic literature. We'll just look at a couple of them. So Melech Basar Vadam, a flesh and blood king, right, a human king, if a person has a burn on him, or if a person asks, or if a poor person asks after his welfare, it's a degradation to him and he does not respond, right? For the human king, it matters who's talking to you, right? If the person has some perceived physical problem, like a burn, or some socioeconomic status problem, like you're poor, then the king is not going to engage with you. That's the experience, at least in this midrash. But God is not so. Hakol mikubalo, v'hu omer kilseni, right? God is not like that. Everybody is accepted by God, and God says, praise me, it's good before me, right? So for God to be king, it's the opposite of the human king. The human king only likes to interact with certain types of people, perhaps because he's nervous that, if a human can be burned, if a human can be poor, a human king could also be those, could embody those. And I'm only sort of a hair's breadth away from that. I don't want to be reminded of my mortality or my income insecurity possibility. And so I'm not going to engage with you. But God doesn't have that problem. God is a king who doesn't embody those concerns. Let's take a look at another one. From the Midrash on Tehillim, the Midrash on Psalms, and many of the Psalms start with this introduction word, la menatzeach, which is often translated in sort of the literal translations as for the conductor, for the leader. It's a term that's not totally clear, some musical instruction for the person who's reciting the Psalm. But linatzeach means to be victorious, to win. And so this midrash is playing off that understanding. So they read la menatzeach not as the one who wins, the victor, but rather la minutzach, the one who is vanquished, the one who is defeated. In other words, it's not an active, it's a passive. Lemi shehu minutzach mibriutav. It's for the one who was defeated by his creations. And now we get the king metaphor. Melech basar vadam, a human king, a flesh and blood king. If you beat him, if you defeat him, then he's angry. But God, you defeat God and God is happy. Why? As it says, therefore God said that God would destroy them. God would destroy the Jewish people had not Moses, his chosen one, stood before him in the breach. That is to say, this is Psalm 106 summary of Jewish history. In this particular moment, the sin of the golden calf, which is part of the reconciling of the sin is part of what we're acting out on Yom Kippur, a process that started in the 40-day cycles previously in Shiva Asar B'Tammuz in the first of Elul. So you're sort of working to the reconciliation point. And indeed, what happened in that story? God wanted to destroy the Jewish people because they had violated God's covenant by worshiping the golden calf. And only because Moshe stood in the breach did God change God's mind and not destroy the Jewish people. That is to say, God was defeated. God did not carry out God's plan. And God was happy that God was defeated. God wanted Moshe to defeat him because that's actually the end result that God always wanted. So even though a human king, you would never say, a human sovereign or ruler, they're the one who love to lose in battle. They love to lose, fights. But God is not so. God is the opposite of that. So what we have here is, and there's a number of these, sort of a series of a human king acts in such a way. God, as king, acts in the opposite of the way. So what I want to argue is that when we say Avinu Malkeinu, the Melech, the Malkeinu part of it, when we're calling God our king, we're not using the metaphor of a human king and just sort of amping it up for God, but rather we're using the metaphor of human king, the opposite of all the associations and the negative associations you have with the human king. That's what God is as king. So if you have a problem with a human king, you're in good state for saying Avinu Malkeinu, because whatever a human king is, God is the opposite. And that's at least the rabbinic view of what it means to call God a king.